Hi and welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Today we're going to do something very cool. And for that, to show you what we're going to do, let me play 3 videos simultaneously. And what you can see is a component that many Apple apps are using at the moment. It is a card view that you can actually drag from the bottom to the top and get more options, or you can do or use it to display lists or additional user interface elements, whatever you like. The Maps app has it, the new Shortcuts app has it, Voice Memo has it, and some other apps like Google Maps have it too. And today we're going to create this cool component all by ourselves with this little Halloween-inspired pumpkin application. As you can see, we're doing almost the same thing here. It looks really cool. We can actually interactively perform this animation, drag our card view app, and some interesting things are happening. Like, for example, we're blurring the background. We're adding this corner radius on the left and on the right. It's all fully animated. We can just press on it to open and close, and we could trigger the animation by sliding or panning up and down. So a very, very cool animation. And in this tutorial, you're going to learn how to use the visual effect view, how to actually use property animators interactively, and also how to use pan gesture and tap gesture recognizers, if you like, by creating this little demo application right here. But before you get started, let me show you some great discounts for my newest Udemy courses, which are from design to code, where you will actually design a complete application from its design stage in Sketch and prototyping in Sketch to customizing everything in Xcode and building the real thing. 2D games with SpriteKit, where you will build a complete game from start to finish, and data-driven apps with core data. All of them are project-based and they have a great discount price at the moment. The core data course is going to be updated very soon to be compatible with Swift 4 and of course Xcode 10, and all of these courses are currently available for just $10.99 on Udemy. Check out the discount codes in the video description below, and this discount is only available until October 31st at the end of the day. But now let's build our app. So let's open up our Start project and let me give you a quick tour of what I've created for you. So this is just a single view application template, and I have added a UI image view to this view controller and added a nice pumpkin image that I have also added to my assets folder. You could use whatever you like, and of course this would hold your user interface in a state that you currently have. And in addition to this view controller in our main storyboard, I also have my second view controller, or at least a card view controller zip file that contains a view. And this is the view that we're going to display in our card view controller, and that is actually going to slide up with our finger or by pressing on this handle or this handle area. And we can later drag this area to the top and then get a nice animation, or just scrub all by ourselves. And if you're going to do something similar, then it's very important that the files owner class of this zip file is actually a card view controller class, which I've also added. And here I have simply an outlet for my handle area. So this on the top, this is my handle area. This includes this little handle. And here at the bottom, I have my content. And of course, I've added all of the necessary constraints. And one last thing is that this view needs also an outlet or referencing outlet to the files owner. So in the connections inspector, just make sure to actually drag to the files owner from the view so that this can work. And of course, this would also be where you place your content for your card view, whatever that may be. But as you can see, there's nothing too fancy here. We also only have this little outlet here in our card view controller, and we have nothing in our view controller. So this is where our main logic is going to go. And we're going to start with adding some properties. And the first property that we're going to add is actually a reference to our card view controller. So here I'm just going to create a card view controller property of the type card view controller. Then if you remember the little demo from the beginning, then you might have seen that there is this nice blur effect, and we're going to use a standard visual effect view for that. So let's also define a property for that, which is of type UI visual effect view. And the cool thing about this visual effect view and all its possibilities is that we can actually animate the intensity of the blur, and this is going to help us tremendously. And what we're also going to add are two constants, one for the card height, which should be a CG float since we're dealing with this type later, and also one constant for the card handle area height, which I'm going to set to 65. And these are just the two constants that we're going to use. Now let's also think about how we can actually simplify our life when it comes to expanding or collapsing our card. So what we could do is defining a enumeration that holds the current state, or that gives us the cases for our two states. So right on top of all my properties, right below I'm defining my class view controller, I'm going to add an enumeration, and I'm going to call that card state. And we are going to have two states. The first case is expanded, and the second case is going to be collapsed. So we can use these two cases, and we can also actually think about how we can get the next state that we should display. So if we think about that, then we could also have a property called maybe card visible, which is kind of a question, so I'm setting this to false. This is a flag that we can use and set it to true if the card is expanded, and we set it to false if the card is collapsed. And if we're creating a computed property, let's call it next state, and make it of type card state, then we can actually return the next state depending on the card visible flag. So if it is visible, then we need to collapse our card, and if it is not visible, so if card visible is false, then we need to expand it. And with this little return statement in our computed property, we can really simplify our lives, and this is really cool. So with these properties defined, there are just two things missing. The first thing is an array that can actually hold all of the animations that we'd like to perform, and there are quite a few. So we need to resize our card view, we need to add the blur in the background, and we also have this corner radius that we're going to add. So therefore, we are going to add an array, calling it running animations, and this is going to be an array of UI view property animator. And you're going to see how this property animator works in a second, but for now, let's just make sure that we have this array where we can put in all of our animations. And then since we want to make our animation interruptible and interactive, we should also store the progress of our animation when it is interrupted. So therefore, I'm also going to create a property and calling it animation progress when interrupted. And this is also going to be a CG float, and let's initialize that with 0. And with that, we have all the properties that we need for this project, and we can actually create a nice function that is going to set up our card. And we don't need any parameters here, and I'm going to add that right below view.load, and I'm also calling it right in view.load so that we do not forget to do that. And let's say that we're going to start with the simple things, and this would be adding the blur effect. And therefore, we have our visual effect view. So I'm taking that, and first of all, initialize that with a UI visual effect view. And then what we need to do with this view is to set it to our current frame. So therefore, we're using self and the view of our view controller, and use its frame to have the effect view be the same size as our view in our main view controller. And then what we also have to do is use our main view and add the visual effect view as a subview. So just call add subview on our view and add visual effect view. And now, with that done, we can already load our card view controller. Therefore, let's use our property, card view controller, and initialize it with the card view controller class and its initializer using a nib name. And this would be just the file name of this zip file here, which is card view controller. So I'm just copying this name here, passing it along as a string, and the second parameter here is the bundle, which I'm specifying with nil, since we do not need to pass that along. And with that, we've initialized our card view controller, and we can add this card view controller as a child to our main view controller. So all I need to do to make that happen is use our view controller, so self, and add a child view controller. And this would be our card view controller. It's as simple as that. But with that, we only have our card view controller. What we do not have is its view. Therefore, I'm using, again, self view, and we're adding our subview, which is the card view controller and its view. Really simple. And the last thing that we actually should do is setting the frame of this card views, or this card view controller's view. So let's access it using card view controller, its view, and its frame. And let's create a CG rect for that, initialize it with x, y, width, and height. So for x, I'm using 0. For the y position of this card view, I'd like to position it at the bottom. So I'm taking my view, so self.view, and its frame, and its height. And what I'd like to subtract now is the card handle area height, so that it looks a little bit from the bottom into our view controller. For the width, I'm going to go with our current views width, so the main view controller's views width, so self.view, bounce, and width. And for the height, I'm using our card height constant that we have already defined. And by changing this constant, you could make it any size you really want for your card view. And now that's actually it for the frame. Now let's also use the card view controller, its view, and set the clips to bounce to true. This is important for later getting the correct display of our corner radius. So just make sure to set clips to bounce to true. And with that, we could already run our application and see if we have our view controller with its pumpkin image, and also at the bottom we have our card view. And of course, I cannot do anything because we haven't added anything, and there are no animations or also no recognizers that would allow us to do anything right here. So to change that, we need to add some gesture recognizers. We're going to have 2 gesture recognizers, one for tapping and one pan gesture recognizer for the interactive animation. And what I'd like to do first, before adding those two these 2 gesture recognizers, I'd like to add their functions, their handle functions. So first of all, we're going to create a function that is called handle card tap. And here we need a parameter called recognizer, which is a UI tab gesture recognizer. And for the second one, we're having handle card pan, which is going to be another recognizer of UI pan gesture recognizer type. And with those 2 handler functions in place, we need to do one little thing, which is exposing these 2 functions to the Objective-C runtime, which is what you can do by adding this little attribute here at Objective-C. And we're doing that for both functions, and this is currently still necessary actually to make this work together with Swift. Because if we have a look at how we define these tap gesture or these gesture recognizers, what we do here is using a object, of course, let's say tap gesture recognizer, which by the way, we're doing that now in setup card again, and we're initializing that with UI tap gesture recognizer. And there are two parameters that we need to specify. The target is self, but the action needs to be defined as a selector. And this is something that is only possible if you expose the functions that we're using here to the Objective-C runtime. So here we're defining a selector, and then we can use our view controller and use the handle card tab function right here. And we actually need to do the same thing for the pan gesture recognizer, UI pan gesture recognizer, initialize it with self as a target. And for the selector, we're using our view controller and then the card handle card pan function. And with that, we have defined our two recognizers that we need. And now all that's left to do is use our card view controller and its handle area and actually add these gesture recognizers. So first we add the tab gesture recognizer, and second, using card view controller handle area, we add the pan gesture recognizer. And with that, we have completed the setup process for our card view or our card view controller, and now we can completely focus on actually handling all the things that we need to do. So therefore, what I'd like to do is filling our handle card pan function with some life, because this is definitely the harder part. So to do that, we actually need to think about our recognizer. A pan gesture recognizer has multiple states, and the states that we're interested in are the began, changed, and ended state. So we can use a switch statement to actually check all of these states using recognizer and its state. And if the current state is began, what we'd like to do is start our transition or animation, and this is all that we want to do here. If the case is changed, then what we'd like to do is update our transition. And if it is ended, if we ended our pan gesture, then we'd like to continue our transition. So you have to imagine that by actually putting your finger on the screen, which is the began state. And if you're moving your finger, you're changing something with what happens inside the pan gesture recognizer. And if you lift your finger, the pan gesture ended. And this is what we need to actually have a look at in a second. But first of all, the default state or the default action that we'd like to perform for any other case is just break, because we're just interested in these three states here. So what we'd like to do now for the start transition is actually defining a function that I'd like to call start interactive transition with two parameters. The first one is the state, which is of type card state, and a duration, which is simply a time interval. So this is the first function that we're going to need. The second one for the change state in our pan gesture recognizer is going to be the update interactive transition, which just receives one parameter, which is fraction completed, which is a CG float. And the last one is the function continue interactive transition, which doesn't need any parameters right here. So with these three functions in place, we could actually already call them. So let's say start interactive transition here. And for the state, I'm simply passing along the next state, since we have this computed property that's going to help us. And here I'm just passing along 0.9 because I think that this is a good duration. You can of course change that to whatever you actually feel that is best for your app. And here for the update function, we're using update interactive transition. I'm just passing along 0 for now. We're going to change that later. And here we just have continue interactive transition. Now, what are these functions going to do? Let's first of all have a look at the start interactive transition function. So the first thing that we should check here is if we do have running animations. So if running animations is actually empty, then we do not have any running animations. That means that if we actually want to start our transition, we should also run our animations, but we're going to do that in a second. And now comes the interesting part for making all of this actually interactive. We might have multiple animations, and you already know that we're working with property animators. So what we can do is, using a for loop, let's use one object here, calling it Animator, and iterate through all of our running animations. And what we need to do to make them interactive is actually pause them. So using the animator and call the pause animation function on it means that we set the speed to 0 of the animation, and by doing that we also make it interactive, so now interaction is actually possible. And what we can also do now is, using animation progress when interrupted, and use our animator and our fraction complete property of the animator to actually set this property of our own, which is actually misspelled. So I'm going to refactor this real quickly, so just using here progress when interrupted. So just quickly rename that. And this is what we have right here. So we run our animations, and once we did that, we use all of our animators that we're going to have, we pause them, make them interactive, and we set our animation progress when interrupted so that we can work with that value, with this value later. So this is what we do here. For the update interactive transition function, we just need to actually update our fraction complete of our actual animation, of all of our animations. So same thing here, we're using a for loop with an animator, and we're iterating through all of our animations. And when we're moving our finger upwards, this means that our fraction, or our complete fraction, is going to change. The same thing when we're moving downwards. So we're using each animator and setting the fraction complete property, using the fraction completed parameter that we have, and add the animation progress when interrupted, because we also have this start and initial value. And this is what we're going to do right here. Very simple, just updating all of our animators so that all the animations are at the same state when we're moving our finger across the screen. And as for the continue animation, or the interactive transition, the last function, all we need to do here again is using all of the animators and using a for loop here, iterating through all of the animators in our running animations array. And we're using each animator, and we just continue the animation with a timing parameter of 0 and a duration factor also of 0. And this means that setting this to 0 means that the property animator just uses the remaining time that is left in our animation, which we have set here, for example, which is 0.9 seconds or whatever you choose here. So these are our 3 functions that we need to actually worry about. And there's one thing left to do, which is actually the real animation part. And here we're going to define a new function, maybe right on top of our start interactive transition function. And I'm going to call that animate transition if needed. And we're going to have a state here, which is our card state. And we're also going to have our duration as a time interval. So this is going to be called every time an animation is needed, or we are going to check if an animation is needed. And actually the first case when this is true is if our running animations array is empty. This means that there are no animations, and we should actually animate the transition if needed. And there we can simply pass along our state and the duration that we've also received here as a parameter in our start interactive transition function. But now the fancy and cool part, which is actually animating. So let's first of all check again if our running animations array is empty. So if it is empty, then then we need to animate our transition. And we're going to add several animations here, but we're going to start simple with just one. And we actually want to create a frame animator now. And this is going to be a UIPropertyAnimator. And this is the cool thing. This is the cool class that we're working now with, which is really simple to use. So we just have to initialize it with a duration. And we can also work with different timing curves. You could define your own curve by just using some control points here, 2 control points. We could use a curve like ease in, ease out, or ease in and out, and define our animations. Or we can use a damping ratio, which I'm going to use right here. And we're going to go with a time interval of our duration that we receive as a parameter. And for the damping ratio, I'm going to go with 1 right here. And now in this animations block, we are actually defining what should happen. And in our case, we could actually do 2 things, which is either moving our card view up or down. So we switch through our states that we've defined as a parameter here. And the first state could be expanded. So if we'd like to expand our card view, which is moving it up, we need to change its Y property and subtracting something of it to actually move it upwards. So let's access self, card view controller, its view, its frame, and its origin, and its Y position. And we're taking self, view, frame, height, and subtracting self and the card height, which is moving it upwards the same or the complete way we've actually defined as this constant, which is then the actual height of your card view in our main view controller. And if we're doing the reverse thing, which is making it collapsed, then we're doing almost the same thing using the card view controller, using its view, its frame, its origin, and its Y position. And this time, we're just using self, view, view, frame, and height. And we're just subtracting card handle area height, which is just a tiny bit, which is the 65 pixels, I think, that we've defined earlier. So this is our frame animation, or our frame animator actually, that we have initialized here with a duration, with a damping ratio, and an animation block. And this is what is actually animated. Now, what we still have to do is actually start the animation, and this is also really simple. We just use our frame animator and we start the animation. And since we're going to have multiple animations and we have this nice running animations array, we'll also append our frame animator to our running animations array. But there's one more thing that we should actually think about, which is our card visible flag that we need to update when an animation is completed. And we can use the frame animator for that, because if we have moved our card view all the way up or all the way down, we have a completed animation. So what we can do is right before we start our animation, we could also add a completion block right here. We do not need any parameters here, so I'm just going to skip that using an underscore. And having this closure right here, we can set self and the card visible flag to actually the inverse of the current state. So I'm just adding an exclamation mark in front of card visible, and if it's false, it's going to be true, and if it's true, it's going to be false. So really simple. And if we have completed our frame animator animation, then we can also use self running animations and remove all elements, because this means that we do no longer need any of these animators in our array. So this is what we actually need to move our card view on screen, having an animation ready for our handle pan gesture. So what I can do is moving it up or down, and the problem at the moment is that it is not really interactive. I can move it up, I can move it down, but what I cannot do is actually move it with my finger, or it does not stay put where my finger is. And this is actually because we're just dealing with the began state. We do not do anything really with the update interactive transition state right here, and this is something that we should change, because we're dealing with a fraction completed of 0 here, which means that we're performing the complete animation all the time, but this is not what we actually want. So in the handle card pan function, we need to check the translation translation of our the current translation of our recognizer. So let's create a translation object right here. And to get the current translation, we're just using our recognizer and its translation function. And here we have to add a view that we want to deal with. In our case, this is of course the card view controller, card view controller, and its handle area. And by getting this translation, we can now calculate the complete fraction, or the fraction completed. This is what we have called our parameter right here for the update interactive transition function. So let's create a fraction complete object right here using the translation, and only its y coordinate, because we do not need any x component for our calculation, and divided by the card height. And with that done, we still need to make a little decision for our fraction complete, because if our card is currently visible, then we just want the fraction complete. And if we actually, or if the card is not visible, we actually want the negative fraction complete to pass along the correct value to our update interactive transition function. So if I pass along now my fraction complete object right here, or this little value that we store in this variable, then as you can see, I can move my card view up, I can move it down, I can just start and it moves up, I can just start the other way around, and this looks already pretty cool. And we could be happy with that and just call it a day. But since we wanted to make this even cooler, we're also adding 2 more animators to our scene here. And we're going to do that in animation or animate transition if needed. And we've already done all we need for the frame animator. But now let's also add something for the corner radius. And therefore I'm calling this new object here corner radius animator, and initialize it with UIPropertyAnimator. But this time I do not want to use a damping ratio. I just like to use a simple curve here. The duration is of course the duration that we receive as a parameter. And for the corner radius, I just use a linear curve. This, I think, makes sense. You could of course change that to whatever you like. And as for the animation block, we again switch through our state. And if we want to expand, then we use self card view controller view and change its layer property and its corner radius to 12. And for the case collapsed, we're just changing it back. Let me just copy and paste that to 0. So it is really as simple as that. And now there is just one thing that we need to do. First of all, use our corner radius animator and actually start the animation. We need to use our running animations array and append our new corner radius animator, and that's it. So since this was so simple, let's also do the same thing for our blur animation. So let's create a blur animator with UIPropertyAnimator. And here I'm going to go again with a damping ratio of 1 with the same duration, of course, damping ratio 1, animations. And again, we use a switch statement, switching through our state property or state parameter. And the first case is going to be expanded. And if we actually want to add our blur, what we do is use self and our visual effect view, access the effect property, and we initialize it with UI blur effect. And here you can just decide what you like. I'm going to go with a dark style. You could go with a light style, whatever you actually prefer. And if we actually collapse, then we use our visual effect view, its effect, and just set it to nil. And that's all there is to actually animating this UI blur effect or animating a visual effect view. But now to make this also happen, let's use our blur animator, start the animation, and also use our running animations array, append our blur animator, and we are done. Isn't that cool? Let's now run this in the simulator, see if we actually do what we promised. And here we are in the simulator, and now I'm going to move that up, and we get a blur animation in the background. It's interactive. We have our corner radius that is animating, and that's so cool. Now, this works so nice. The performance on real devices, of course, a lot better than in the simulator. You won't get this laggy behavior on your real device, but this looks really, really amazing already. But what's still missing is our tap gesture that we have to add here. And as I've promised, this is actually the easy part. We have dealt with our pan gesture. Now we deal with the tap gesture. We're switching through the recognizer state again, so state of the recognizer in our handle card tap function. And the first case that we're interested here actually, and also the only case, is ended. For default we use break since we do not want to check anything else. And here again, this is the place where we call animate transition if needed for the next state with a duration of 0.9 seconds. You could also store this as a constant in our property list on top of our file, and you wouldn't have to enter this value 2 times, but maybe you'd like to change that depending on if the user taps or if the user pans, but you're completely free, of course, to decide that. But now if we click or press, then we also trigger our animation, and this is really so cool. I love this card view, and I really enjoy using apps that have such a nice control in their user interface. I could play with it all day long, but now I thank you so much for participating in this tutorial. Don't forget to check out these great courses with the Halloween discount. You'll find all the links in the video description below. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't done already, and if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.